Chapter 18. I use part of the time when Maharshi is absent from the temple to visit holy places in the vicinity. My first is to the sacred hill, Arunachala, which rises high above the ashram, as if pointing to heaven with its sharp peak. I go to all the caves where the sage dwelt in his youth. One of the most famous is called Virupaksha Cave. Here the young Swami Ramana spent many years in meditation and ascetic discipline. It is said that in ancient times a great yogi was buried there. I easily found a little path on the slope of Arunachala leading to this cave. There I saw a big rock jutting out, and below it a small veranda with a concrete floor, an iron lattice all around, and small doors in the background. These were shut by a rusted and old but still used lock. There were no signs of life. I went round the cave, plucked a few red flowers, and then sat quietly on a big warm stone. As I was deciding to return home, a thin, middle-aged Hindu came down from the hill and approached the cave. He saluted me in the usual Hindu manner, to which I responded by the same salute, placing my palms together at the level of my chest. He opened the little iron gate and entered, inviting me with a kind gesture and a smile to follow him. I had to bend almost double to pass through the very low and narrow doors. Inside, in the center of a little 9 by 9 foot cell, hollowed out of the rock, stood a small cubic altar about 5 feet high, covered with garlands of wild yellow flowers. In the center, blue blossoms were scattered and a light was burning. On a shelf cut out of the rock stood an earthen water pot. By it, my new friend, the sannyasin, placed a small vessel containing food which he had just brought. Nothing else was to be seen in the cave. I sat down on the cleanly swept concrete floor near the stone altar. My host did the same. We understood each other without the need of words. He knew the purpose of my visit, and I understood well what this secluded, silent hermitage meant for him. In the afternoon, I went to another cave, situated somewhat higher up the hill, and named Skanda Ashram. This was the next place where Maharshi stayed before he came down to the present Ramana Ashramam, where the grave of his mother, the temple, and all the buildings are now situated. As in Virupaksha, the rock platform is surrounded by a lattice wall, and from a palm grove and small garden, a few steps cut into the rock lead to a large veranda and several rooms inside. It was a Hindu holy day, and several festively dressed women and boys were standing on the veranda under the pleasant shade of the palms. A young Indian with an intelligent and kind expression came out to meet me. He showed me a small door leading inside. This cave was similar to, but looked a bit richer than the former one. An identical little altar stood in the center, adorned with flowers. A light was burning, and an old photograph of Maharshi in meditative posture, one of the first known photos taken some 40 years ago, was standing on the altar. Some mats with colored stripes were stretched on the floor. The young ascetic stood with folded hands and bowed head before Maharshi's picture. I inquired whether this was the room where the sage had dwelt many years ago, as there were other little cells in the rock hermitage. He nodded assent, then went out for a moment, returning with a tray full of fresh ashes and a tiny vessel with red powder called kumkum. Both are always used during puja, the Hindu ritual worship. One had to make a small mark between the eyebrows with the red powder, and then 3 stripes on the forehead with the holy ashes. The first was easy, but at the second I hesitated, not being sure how many stripes I must make, nor how to do so without risk of a mistake. The Swami who was holding the tray understood my uncertainty and immediately demonstrated with a kind gesture. 3 stripes were to be done with 3 fingers. I followed his example, and after having complied with this ancient Aryan ritual, sat down quietly in the corner of the veranda near the Maharshi's former cell and withdrew my consciousness from all objects, removing everything from its field. First, the colored saris of the women sitting opposite disappeared. Then the whisper of an old white-bearded ascetic repeating his mantras just near me. When I returned to the visible world, I heard from afar the ashram gong calling for supper. Here in the evening air, sounds are clearly heard for a radius of several miles. I silently took leave of the inmates of Skanda Ashram and walked down the stony steps. So this evening, for the first time, I sat at the ashram meal with the signs on me of a Hindu sadhu, indicating one dedicated to spiritual life. Maharshi's place was empty, but opposite me sat the newly arrived family of a Maharaja, his wife and 2 youngsters, a son and a daughter. And on my left was Yogi Ramaya, and on the right the senior pupils and inmates of the ashram. It seemed to me that the Maharaja's family were casting somewhat envious glances at my spoon, which was so comfortable to use, especially when dealing with liquids. For out of courtesy, they had to follow the common custom of eating with the hand, whereas when at home they had probably long ago forsaken it.